Hello and welcome to my channel. I am BeardedDev, and in this video I'm going to talk you through how to create an Azure SQL database in a matter of minutes. Now, to start with, we are in the Azure portal. We have an Azure subscription set up. Now, there are a number of ways we can create a resource in Azure. So I'm on the home screen here, and yours may look a bit different because I've already got resources set up. One of the options we've got is this simple create a resource icon here, which is simply going to take us through to the marketplace, and SQL database, being a popular option in Azure, is available for us to click on. And if we click on SQL database there, it will take us to the screen where we're able to start creating or provisioning our SQL database. If we go back to home, there's another option. If we click on this hamburger icon, the three lines in the top left hand corner, we can also click there and create a resource, or we've got this option under our favourites unless we've customized that, and we can click on there and click on SQL databases, and then we've got the option towards the bottom of the screen or towards the top left hand side, and again we can click on create, and it will open up a new blade for us to start provisioning or creating our SQL database. Now I'm going to go back to home, and this is the option I wanted to show. I'm just simply going to type in Azure SQL, and we have the option for the different services available, but I'm actually going to select the marketplace option here. And the reason I like to do this is because it brings up our typical three options of creating databases in Azure. So we have our SQL databases, which is what we're going to go through in this video, which is a platform as a service database. We have our SQL managed instances, or we have SQL virtual machines. So that's more infrastructure as service. If we want to create a virtual machine we can log into with a SQL Server instance running on that virtual machine. So we're actually going to select the SQL database option, and we have our resource type of single database, elastic pool, or database server. So elastic pools are collections of databases. We provision resources for a pool, and then they are shared amongst our databases, but we're not going to talk too much about that. A database server is simply a logical container for our database. So for this video we are going to select single database. Don't worry if you are interested in the other options, because there will be more videos coming soon for you to explore on the other options. And we're simply going to click create. Okay, that's going to open our create SQL database, and we can see we've got a few different tabs up here. We've got our basics, networking, security, additional settings, tags, and then review and create. So we're going to configure various different options, and then we're going to actually create that database with those specified options. So the first thing we select, as with most resources that we create, is our actual subscription. And then for this video we're actually we can either select an existing resource group or create a new one, and for this video we are going to create a new resource group. So we will call this resource group rg_YouTube, and you can call your resource group anything that you like, anything that means something to you. And the beauty of resource groups is it doesn't have to be specific across Azure, as you'll soon see with some of the naming conventions. They have to be unique across Azure. So we just simply calling that rg_YouTube. I'm then going to enter a name for my database. Now what I intend to do with this database is actually install a sample copy of AdventureWorks, and I'll show you how to do that as you follow along with the video. So I'm actually going to call the database AdventureWorksLT, which is the database that we're actually going to be provided with as a sample. And then we have to create a server. And as I mentioned, a server is effectively a logical container for our databases. So we're going to actually create a new server. Now here we have to actually create a unique name for that server. It has to be unique in Azure. So what I'm going to do to ensure that I get a unique name, or hopefully I get a unique name, is just put AW, and it all has to be lowercase. And then I'm going to put the current date stamp, which is the 12th of the 4th, 2021. And we can see that name is available. And then what we have to enter is our server admin credentials. And there are certain rules around that, so we can't just enter SA, for example. So our login name must not contain a SQL identifier or a typical system name like admin, administrator, SA, and so on. But one of the names it does accept is server admin. I'm just going to go ahead and call this server admin, and I'm just going to put in a simple password that I can remember. Of course, when you are setting up your Azure SQL database, this will typically be protected DBA details, so you want to ensure your password is extremely strong, a certain character length, combination of special characters, and maybe a sentence as well. And then we're going to select our location. And the nearest to me is, I'm based in the UK. I'm going to simply select UK South and click on OK. Now that hasn't created that new server for us at this point, but it's going to be part of the deployment we send, is to create a new server. We then have the option here to use SQL Elastic Pools. And as mentioned, what we'd be doing there is configuring a certain amount of resources, and they'd be shared across multiple databases. So generally you want to consider that option if you have multiple databases where usage across those databases is perhaps sporadic. Maybe one database is used heavily throughout the day, one database is used heavily throughout the night. That would be a perfect scenario to use a SQL pool with allocated resources. One could use those resources within the day, then quiet down, and then the other one could use those resources at night. Then compute and storage. We're going to select our options now for what size server or resources we want to allocate. So I'm going to click on Configure Database, and this is where, when we are creating resources through the Azure portal, we need to kind of be careful of the default options, because if I highlight here, my estimated cost would be £325.98 per month, and that's in Great British pounds or pounds sterling. So what we're going to do is have a look at how we can lower that cost. This is actually a database I'm creating for personal use. It's just going to be for a short term. We can see there are some other options here in terms of the compute tier. So we've got provisioned, which is where we say we want this amount of resources, and that's ideal if we know we're going to use that amount of resources. Or serverless, which is where Azure handles the scaling for us. So we say we want resources starting from here, going up to here, and then depending on the usage of our database, Azure will automatically scale between those two min and max parameters for us, if you like. So we have a couple of options: general purpose, hyperscale, business critical. So general purpose, perhaps for our test or dev workloads. Hyperscale for massive amounts of data, you're looking at 100 gig plus databases. Or business critical, so that's important for our production workloads, that we would have a look at those business critical options. But then there's also two compute options, if you like. So there's the vCore model, which is what we're looking at the moment, or the previous model that Azure SQL Database was actually created with, which is DTUs, which is how we're going to actually look at saving ourselves money, particularly if we're just testing out SQL Database for now. So we can see just shifting to the DTU model, we've then lowered our costs to £13.98 per month. And we can see we've got our basic options, standard or premium. Now DTUs is a combination of compute, I/O and memory. So it's difficult for us to comprehend when working with a physical server how many DTUs that we'd actually need to use to say if we was migrating from on-premise to Azure. I believe there are some calculators online, but it's difficult for us to understand. We're completely switching the way we work, which is why they've introduced the vCore model, which is actually more beneficial for production workloads. But we're just looking to get started at this point. So I'm going to leave it at standard. I'm happy with the cost at £13.98 per month. And also, if you've recently signed up to Azure, you may find that you're able to create SQL databases as a free service, or you can use your free credits towards them. So I'm just going to click on apply, and that will take me back to my screen where I've set it to a standard SO. That doesn't mean I can't change it in the future. If I start using this database, I can scale up and scale down as I want to. So I'm going to go on to next, which is the networking page. And this is how we configure access for our server and our database that sits on that logical server. So network connectivity. By default, when you're looking at creating a SQL database, there is no connection options available. So the first option is, would we like to configure it via a public or private endpoint? Private endpoint is where we're actually bringing the database into our network, or a public endpoint is somewhere that's accessible from different networks such as the internet. So I'm going to set the connectivity method to a public endpoint, and then we have our options of firewall rules. So do we want Azure services and resources to access this server? So perhaps we're setting up this database and we're going to be using it to move data around. We need other Azure resources such as Data Factory to connect to this database. So I'm actually going to set that option to yes, and I want to be able to connect to the database myself. So I'm going to add my current client IP address. Next, I'm going to move on to security. So security provides us an option for Azure Defender for SQL, and you have to be careful of this page because I believe the default is it does start the free trial. As I've gone onto the page, it's selected not now. Now, if you are looking for enhanced security, Azure Defender is an excellent tool. It will detect things like SQL injection attacks, and you'll be able to report on those. So I'm just going to say no to that, not now, and then I'm going to go on to additional settings, and this is where we can configure our data source. So we have a few options. We start with no data, we start with a backup. So if we've got a backup file, we can create our database with a copy of that backup, or we can select sample. And this is where our AdventureWorksLT database will be created for us. Next, I'm going to move on to tags. So tags are name value pairs, particularly useful for cost management or resource management. You will soon find the value in tags when you start creating a massive amount of resources in Azure. From a commercial point of view, you can add tags for your projects, your cost codes, and the same from a cost point of view. So typical companies only tend to have the one subscription, and you tend to get an invoice per subscription, and if you're using that company wide, it can be difficult to know which departments to allocate those to, and also from a support perspective. So if you're an Azure administrator, you're looking at the whole amount of resources within Azure for your company. How do you know which department each resource belongs to? We're not going to add any tags for now, but I will be doing a video on that separately. Next, we're going to be moving on to review and create, which will give us our estimated cost per month. It will give us an option to have a look at the Azure Marketplace terms, and then just a basic coverage of what we've created. So we're actually creating a new resource group. It's going to be in the UK South region. We're creating a new server. This is our compute and storage option. We're going to allow Azure services and resources to access this server. We're going to add my current IP address. We're not setting a private endpoint. We're not locking it down to our own network. We haven't selected advanced data security, and we are going to be using a sample set of data, and we haven't had any tags at this point. There is a further option down here where we can download a template for automation. So what that will do is take all of those settings we've configured, put them into a JSON file, and then we're able to just deploy that in the future. So say if we need to deploy many databases, template automation, ARM templates can be very useful for that. We're now happy with our options, and we're going to go ahead and click on create. We're going to get a message to say our deployment is in progress, and on this screen it's going to show us the various resources that are being created. Now, Azure SQL Database is a platform as a service option, so at the moment Azure is doing different things behind the scenes that are not really relevant to what we want to see. All we want to see is a new Azure server created and a new Azure database created. So this can take a few minutes depending on the options you've configured. If you have gone for sort of a high spec database, then it may take longer, but this should be done within a matter of minutes. So we can see at this point the different things that Azure is creating for us. So it's creating the server, different firewall rule access to that server, and it's now creating the database. Okay, we can see now our deployment is complete, and now we have the option to go to resource. So we can see our SQL database has been created. This is the overview screen for our database. We also have an overview for our server. So things like firewalls can be created at both the server and the database level. So we have our resource group name, our status, location, subscription it belongs to. And then we also have some interesting visualizations that show about our utilization, and then any notifications or typical database features that we should be implementing. Things such as geo-replication, perhaps we want to protect our database from disaster recovery. Dynamic data masking, perhaps we want to hide, or not hide, but limit exposure to sensitive data. Automatic tuning, so perhaps we want to allow the SQL Server engine to perhaps be able to create and remove indexes. And there are a lot of other options we can configure. We also have here a query editor. So if we click on query editor, we can see we have a SQL Server authentication option here. So we're just going to enter the server admin details we provided and click on OK. Now we've logged in as server admin, and we can click on tables, and then we can actually run queries within this window. IntelliSense was detecting that I was. So if we have a look at Sales LT customer, we can go ahead and run that query, and we have a results grid here that shows us the details of each of those customers. So as you can see, Query Editor, I'm not the biggest fan. It's been in preview for some time, but we can still use tools, SQL Server Management Studio and the more recent Azure Data Studio, to now connect to this database. So I'm just going to simply close this down for now. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Are you using SQL Database, or are you considering migrating your on-premise workloads? Are you using it for personal reasons like I do? I do a lot of my training on Azure SQL Database because I'm able to create a database as I need for the time I need, pay for it, and then remove that database, stop paying for it. Thanks a lot for watching.